All right, let's start the meeting. Are you recording, Ms. Ernst?
Greg is recording, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, let's call to order the meeting of the Transportation Advisory Board of the Metropolitan Council. It is Wednesday, February 16th, 2022, 12:33 p.m. And has been our practice in working in this virtual world. We will entertain approving the agenda and calling roll in the same roll call vote. And Doug Anderson's been leading us off well, but he's not with us today, I don't think. So whoever is next in line will be able to start out with both answering the call to roll as well as approving the agenda. So let's start roll call and approval of the agenda, Ms. Ernst.
Let's see, we'll start with Bailey then.
Aye and approve.
There you
Barber,
go, Mayor. Way to go.
Here and I.
Barnes,
Here and I.
Crimmins,
Here and I.
Dugan, Foster,
Here I.
Geisler,
Here I.
Julani Stevens, Gotell,
Commissioner Anderson here for Gotell. Here I.
perfect, thank you. Hanson, Holberg,
Here, yes.
Hollinshead,
Here, yes.
let's see, Jepson,
Here and I.
Karwoski,
Here and approve.
Keeley,
Here and approve.
Koski,
She was here and said she can't, or can you hear now?
Yep, I'm here.
Koski,
Here, can you hear me?
yes. I'm assuming an I as well.
Oh, and I, yeah.
Okay. Lewis,
Here and I.
Lindeke,
Here and yes.
Look,
Here and I.
Malichnik,
Here and I.
Martinson,
Present, I.
Mattis Castillo, Buin,
Here and I.
Naryanan,
Here and I.
Petrick,
Here and I.
Stephenson,
Here and I.
Ulrich,
Here and I.
Williams,
Here and I.
Windshuttle,
Aye.
and Workman.
Uterman for Workman, here and I.
Thanks, Matt.
Very good. Thanks, everybody. We've got distinct quorum and we have a agenda approved. Despite being in a virtual world and not live, we still have public forum, and there may be people that have tuned in to participate in the meeting. If there's anyone that wants to address the Transportation Advisory Board about any concern they have that's not on the agenda, you're welcome to speak now. You'll have a 3-minute time limitation.
I didn't receive any,
Ms. Ernst, have you seen anybody, or Elaine?
no, I did
No.
not receive anything from anyone.
All right, very good. Let's move on then to the reports section of the agenda. My report will be short, and then I'm going to turn to Mayor Windshuttle, who covered the exec committee for me today, as I attended a meeting of community leaders led by Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman on some of the crime issues we're dealing across the metropolitan area. So first of all, I want to, and you saw Councilmember Koski on the screen. I want to introduce her again and welcome her to make a couple of comments. She is joining us as a member of a city of the first class, and that is the city of Minneapolis. We have two of those cities in the state of Minnesota, St. Paul and Minneapolis. We all think all of our cities are first class, but there's a definite definition to it. So Member Koski, Councilmember Koski, now a member of the TAB. Koski, welcome. And you want to tell us a little bit about your background and your what area of Minneapolis you represent and your interest in transportation. You're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. I think I'm just having some technical issues with WebEx, so I appreciate the patience. But thank you, everybody, for having me here today. I am grateful to learn at my first TAB meeting. So council member for the Ward 11, which is in the south central part of Minneapolis. I don't know how many people are familiar with that area, but I was born and raised in Minneapolis, so I grew up though in northeast Minneapolis, and I've lived in a lot of different areas within Minneapolis. So I'm excited to be here, and I look forward to being able to contribute and support this board. So thank you so much for having me here today.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Koski, for being here. We're pleased to have you with us. And your alternate is going to be Elliot Payne, also from the Minneapolis City Council. Did Mr. Payne join us?
I am here.
Oh, good. Go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Elliot Payne, he, him. I represent Ward 1 on Minneapolis City Council. I am excited to be here. I am a full-time biker and very much interested in seeing how we can utilize transportation to address climate action, issues of racial equity, making sure that people can move freely through the city by whatever is most affordable and convenient for them. And I think that having public transit be the most affordable, convenient path would be good policy for us. So those are just kind of a high level where I'm coming from. And thanks for having me.
All right. We're pleased to have you with us as well. So thank you for being here. And it's not often that the alternate shows up for the first time with the regular member, but that tells us a little bit about your level of enthusiasm. So thanks for those introductory comments as well. I'm going to turn now to Mayor Winshuttle to talk a little bit about what happened at the TAB Exec Committee meeting today. Mayor Winshuttle.
All right, welcome everyone. Thanks, and welcome to our new members. That's awesome. So I'm going to keep this so we can keep moving fast. So at our TAB meeting, first item was we had to select our vice chairs, which currently is held by Debbie Cattell and myself. And it was a motion off the floor to recommend that they both stay, as Debbie is the first vice chair and I'm the second vice chair. And they both bailed on me today, and I had to run the exec meeting for the first time. So, but we got through it. And then the TAB liaison is currently Peter Dugan, and the motion was made on the floor to keep Peter, and he was interested in staying as the TAB liaison. So next, we basically went over our today's agenda to see if there was anything. Member Solberg touched on some, and so did Member Karwoski. Talked about a couple of items, but they'll be discussed as we go through, so I won't go into any detail on that. And then we talked about future items that weren't on the current list. Everyone should have gotten that list, and a couple things that came up. Recommendation on having a legislative update to hear what's going on there. Suburban transit providers, we moved out a little bit till possibly after the legislative session. Transit ways, and then post-COVID transit, we're going to move into the June meeting as well. So those were some of the items, and just remember, items can come up, and I believe can be directed to Elaine if you have anything to add. And items obviously can be moved around as we look at things and lining up people to have available to talk on those items. And then we did spend quite a while on the mobility study, talked at length about a number of things, and I'm sure, again, I'm not going to touch on much. It'll all come out here when we go over that informational item as well. And then lastly on there was our process recommendations, and there were items that came in on how people felt about things going. A couple of the items that came up were, one was about how to go about voting. Was there a different way, like raising your hand versus actual roll call? And legally, I don't believe that is a possibility. And with so many screens, it's easily someone could be missed or get the wrong thing, or somebody doesn't take a hand down. So we're going to continue with the same roll call vote. Just some reminders as we move into early into the new year is that to streamline that process with so many members is be ready. A couple people in front of you, get yourself unmuted so you don't have to go through that. Be prepared for that, so that you're ready, and as soon as you do your vote, go back on the mute. Because the other item that was in there was there's so many interruptions, phone calls, people talking in the background, that if people could really we ourselves just need to pay more attention to where we're at. Because like I say, I don't want to say about everybody else, because I know I'll be the first one that won't come off mute or something. But just be prepared. And if you get a phone call, everybody understands that. But make sure make sure your screen's muted, that you're not talking. And that's very disruptive, and it really can throw off the meeting. So those were just some reminders that we threw out there. And then another item that came up in there was about moving the agency reports to the end. We talked about it at the exec committee. We feel that those agency reports are important and sometimes lead into the items that we're going to be discussing. So we felt that it's important that we keep them there. Plus, there's always that part, if we run late, then all of a sudden we don't have them, then it's another month, or we're given those reports and many people have had to scurry off to another meeting. So we opted to say keep the agency reports where they are at this time. And I think that's it. I don't know if there's anybody that was there. Elaine, did I miss anything? Was that pretty much covered?
The other thing that I remember is for the presentations, there was a request if the presentations could be streamlined
Oh, yes.
with more cliff notes or some type of summary of the presentation attached to the agenda, so they could have more of a background and then just have the presentations be highlights.
Yes, and that's right there in front of me. I missed it. Sorry. But that's it in a nutshell there, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great update. Did you have any conversation about when the Met Council might be going back to work at its facility, or when we might be coming back into the facility live, or what future determinations have been made? We have, many mayors and city council members as part of the tab, and I think city councils are in various stages of either continuing to work in person or about to go back. Any conversation there, Mayor?
We did not, but I think part of it is that most of our council chambers, we got a little extra room, but when we get into that where we hold our tab meetings, that's pretty crowded. So there might be a lot of people that aren't comfortable with it, but I don't know really who. Is it us that makes that decision? I thought it was the state was governing this.
I don't. Yeah, I think
Deb has her hand up.
Member Barber has her hand up.
Basically, everything under council has been the direction of Chair Zelli to remain virtual at this point. We haven't gotten an update yet as to when that might change. So the last order that he put out was just for without an actual final timeline. But I anticipate we'll start to get some information on kind of return to work plans and things like that in March that I can report on then.
Thank you for that, Member Barber. All right, let's move on to agency reports. And Member Barnes for MnDOT.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I got kind of a follow-up from on the last meeting as we were talking about safety. I talked about kind of the TZD numbers, and we sent out some information, and thanks, Elaine, for sending that. Just kind of as a follow-on again, as we start into 2022 here, things kind of knock on wood that they're starting to look a little bit better. Hopefully the trend continues and keeps kind of a downward trend. So it's good to see that it's starting out. But with that, we got to continue to keep kind of the emphasis on things that, again, that we were talking about. I was looking to still, as we do, like some kind of a quarterly summary from the Metro. So you'll probably get something here in the next month, and you can start giving me feedback if the information is valuable. I did want to bring up, and I will send this to Elaine to forward out, or if people are interested, there's we're going to have a Metro TZD workshop at this point. The date is April 27th, and we're looking to have it at the Earl Brown Center. But again, the registration isn't going to go until the end of March. Kind of waiting to see, if it will be or if it'll need to be virtual like it has for the last few times. So either way, whether again it's open for not only those that are doing the day-to-day types of TZD from the different disciplines, but also policymakers. So if you yourself haven't been to one or interested in attending one of the workshops or have some key folks you'd like to see, well, add it in there, because this is one of those where the more we can share ideas and learn, the better it helps. So with that, Mr. Chair, that's all I had as an update, but if there are questions, let me know.
I thought your comment about quarterly updates on what's going on in Metro District, if you had something in writing or a little summary bullet point list of things that are going on, that's an interesting idea to be able to give some thought to. And I think providing the tab with that information quarterly or semi-annually would be helpful. So any questions for Member Barnes? All right, let's go on to Member Bewan on behalf of the MPCA and see if he has anything to report out on behalf of his agency.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone, members. Todd Bewan with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Yeah, two quick things to mention today. Just a little context and reminder that 2022 is year 5 of a 10-year program where we're dispersing $47 million under the Volkswagen settlement. So state of Minnesota received $47 million 5 years ago to distribute out in grants for cleaner equipment, things like school buses, heavy duty equipment, construction equipment, a lot of different opportunities for cleaner equipment, cleaner fuels, changing out vehicles to cleaner things like propane, natural gas, and so cleaner equipment, cleaner fuels, and also EV charging is another way in which we just sort of target for where we're distributing money. And we have a number of grants that are open this year in 2022. More details are available on our website on that. But just a little context that we are in year 5 of 10, and we'll continue to work on that over the next 5 years. The second update is just something I mentioned last month too, is that the governor's climate change sub-cabinet released a draft on February 1st of the climate action framework, which is a plan really for the state of Minnesota for how to work on climate mitigation of carbon emissions, and also resiliency of communities. So that plan is out there. It's on our website. There's an open comment period at this time. And there is a section in the report in the framework that is pretty rigorous around clean transportation. So it's relevant for this group. And there are a number of other areas just in the report as well, but clean transportation is one of them. So, I mean, I did offer earlier, that if you want to, if this group would want to hear a little bit more about it, we could have someone come in over the next few months and do a short information report out on that. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Bewan. I think that's an excellent idea that we get a report out on the climate action framework, or anything else you think is relevant for the tab to know about. And then also with respect to the grants, you're halfway through that $47 million VW settlement disbursement. Is there information on your website for governmental entities to be able to look to see if there's any grant opportunities there?
Yes, absolutely. There's as much information as is needed, whether it's, seeing it there or also just making a phone call. And we have people that are working on that program who can answer, very detailed questions about that too. So I can provide, that information, a link to the information, and also contact information if desired for the whole for the whole board, I could provide that through Elaine.
Yeah, that would be great. I think if you could provide that through Elaine and then she can disseminate it to everybody. So thanks for that. Any other questions for Member Bwin? Let's move on to Member Crimmins and get a report on the Metropolitan Airport Commission.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. The first thing I'd like to report on is that the staff has come to an agreement with contracts for the Teamsters that are responsible for the snow plowing on the runways and with the operating engineers. Those two contracts came to agreement. They now have to negotiate contracts with the maintenance people at the airport. All the other, about 75 or 80% of the contracts have been settled up to date. So we're just winding down, and the staff is quite busy. I mean, there was a little threat there, a strike. At this time of year is not a good time to have a strike on snow removal, actually at the airport. So we're very glad that's been settled. COVID testing is still ongoing at the airport in the parking ramps, but only by appointment. And if you come to the airport, you'll see signs over the parking entrances that said by appointment only, and that's for your COVID testing. And then there's shots are still available in Terminal 1 on post security. And if you go to Terminal 2 pre-security, they're still giving COVID shots. And that's going to be coordinated with the state of Minnesota. So whenever the state decides we should stop, that's when we'll stop. And the last thing I have, we had to put infrastructure off over the last couple of years. We're about $300 million behind in infrastructure spending because of COVID and the lack of people flying. And now that numbers are picking up, staff is trying to work on appropriating funds for the projects, but also prioritizing which projects should go first. Some of our trams need to be replaced. They've gotten to end of life and they're scheduled for replacing. So we're into that. And the other thing I have, passenger travel is increasing and flights, routes are increasing also. So other than that, that's about all I have to say, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thanks, Member Crimmins. Anybody have any follow-on for the MAC and Member Crimmins? Congratulations on getting a Teamsters contract negotiated. I was in a call a few weeks ago with your chairman and Rick King and Brian Ricks, and they looked a little haggard from worrying about that Teamsters contract.
Yeah, it's not a good time of year to be negotiating snow removal in the middle of winter.
Yeah, no, but that was a good thing to get done. Get behind you. All right. Then let's move on to Member Deb Barber, and the Metropolitan Council update.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. On our Transportation Committee meeting last Monday, we had presented our 2021 year-end ridership reports for the transit system. For our council ridership by mode, our bus ridership from 2020 to 2021 was down 12%, light rail was up 4%, and Metro Mobility has increased up to 26%. Overall, the entire system is down 6% between 6.5% between 2020 and 2021. Our staff did an additional analysis just looking at the numbers from Q2 through Q4. As you recall, in Q1 of 2020, that was pre-COVID, and so we had higher ridership numbers then. Doing that same analysis, just looking at the time periods when we've been in the pandemic, we find that actually from 2020 to 2021, our ridership increased by 33.8%, which includes a 23% increase on bus and a 59% increase on light rail. We also are seeing, when we look at the numbers for our bus ridership, we are seeing some minor changes from 2020 to 2021 in local and BRT. What continues to be impacted is there's a 62% decrease from 2020 to 2021 in our express ridership. Also looking at our suburban transit providers, they are seeing similar trends. They are seeing decreases in their express services, but we've seen with some of our partner agencies, for example, MVTA and Southwest Transit, the numbers aren't quite as dramatic because those agencies also provide local service. So there are changes in ridership between 2020 and 2021. For MVTA, for example, was 24%, and Southwest Transit is 16%. So there's a lot of information as we look and move coming out of the pandemic. I think that we'll kind of continue to look at these numbers, and especially to see with return to office, to see what impact there is on our express service. I see Amity has her hand up, so I can pause and answer that question. We're going on to the next thing.
Member Foster, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Member Barber. Does Metro Transit ever do like demographic studies beyond the TBI, demographics of riders, like type of job that they're taking transit to?
Not necessarily type of job, but there is some socioeconomics that are built into some of the ridership analysis. And when we've been doing the follow-up surveys off of the prior transit onboard survey, we've been going back and sampling with some of the people who were in that original survey. We're trying to gather some of that information to see, if number one, are we seeing differences among communities and different job levels or not, and also to make sure that we're not, as we're adjusting service levels to adapt, that we're making sure we're not causing any disparate impacts. So it's something that we continue to kind of look at in real time. I think that it's very critical that we do some more of that as we come back and look at as we kind of emerge outside of the, hopefully, the end of the pandemic. So something that's very critical that we keep looking at. You have another question, Amity?
I do. Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead and follow on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What's in order to do more in-depth surveys or studies of that, what would Metro Transit need to make that a yearly process, to really create the systems to be able to do that kind of survey and study?
Trying to see if I've got, give me 1 second. I'd have to look into, because we do things on a rolling basis, and I think that I think we're trying to do more of that. Even when you look at how we changed the structure of the TBI a few years ago to provide data in more real time instead of looking over long time windows. So I think we're doing some of that, but let me reach out to some of our staff and see if I can get you a better answer, so you kind of know what we're looking at, especially as we come out of COVID. Perfect. All right, the other thing I wanted to mention was the zero emission bus transition plan, which is our aggressive, aspirational, and achievable framework to identify how Metro Transit will be planning for zero emission bus fleet. We've had presentations here at TAB, and we've had them at Transportation Committee. The plan was adopted by the council last week, and that information has been presented to the legislature. The plan establishes the short-term target for Metro Transit of at least 20% of 40-foot bus replacement procurements to be electric buses from 2022 through 2027. And additionally, Metro Transit will update the council at least once per year on the performance of the fleet, of the ZEB fleet and infrastructure, as well as update capital and operating plans annually based on our performance. So I'm sure that information, as we learn more and start implementing the plan, will come back to this group as well. And with that, I'll take any questions.
All right. Thanks, Member Barber. Questions for Member Barber? I'm going to go to Member Keeley. Did you want to have any? Did you have any comment you wanted to make with regard to the suburban transit operators in terms of data, or is that something you want to provide at some time in the future?
Yeah, I think I guess I have a general problem with representing the STA members on this tab board and not having an opportunity to report the ridership results for our members. And I think it would be more appropriate for whoever's in this seat, myself or anybody in the future, to be providing those numbers and giving a comprehensive report. It falls under that suggestion that I made that it sounds like we were given one presentation a year in April, which that's not the end of the session, by the way. I think session is going till May 23rd or something like that. So I just feel like, why am I representing STA on this tab when I never have a chance to actually report STA data, ridership data, what our planning is, what our needs are. And I think those executive directors should have the opportunity to come in once a quarter and provide that information. Now, I'm not saying Metro Transit is not, you know, the barrel, right? The 800-pound gorilla. They have 80 some percent of all the transit. So I absolutely respect that Metro Transit plays a huge role in the dollars, in the service, in the service needs. But we do have a substantial and represent a substantial number of riders where there's substantial community growth in population. And that's why I had requested in my survey feedback that we have a chance to provide a presentation once a quarter, because ultimately in the last 12 months, it's been the Metro Transit show 100% of the time. And the suburban transit providers had zero opportunity to present anything. And I just think that's not fair. I mean, I'm not asking for a lot. Like, I think once a quarter is pretty minimal considering, and maybe even twice a year would be agreeable. I just feel like we're being carved out and not represented the way we should. And if I'm going to be on tab and represent suburban transit, why don't I have an opportunity to share this data, our ridership reports, our needs, our planning, et cetera? That's my frustration. And I apologize. I'm frustrated. I think this is very important.
That's perfectly understandable. I think you're on the nub of an interesting idea here that we have a quarterly report out by the suburban transit providers, maybe preceding the TAC report. The agency reports are there, MnDOT, MPCA, MAC, and Met Council, because they're agencies by statutory designation. And I think we just historically, long before I was involved, got in the habit of having those agency members report out on relevant matters. But certainly the suburban transit providers, let's give that some conversation here at the exec committee. And so thanks for that thought, Member Keeley.
Mr. Chair?
Appreciate it. Yes, Member Barber?
I will tell you my intention in reporting those numbers out was actually to shine a positive light on something, and was actually at the request of the providers from the managers of the suburban transit providers, because they requested when we report numbers that we report some of their numbers as well. So it wasn't meant to disparage anything. It was actually to shine a light that by providing some creative additional services that a couple of our providers who focus on other things besides express service have been able to weather this a little differently. And one of the things at Tab Exec that we talked about was moving out the full presentation from the suburban providers a little bit later, because we expect express service to start to change a little bit between even March and June this year. And we wanted to make sure we captured those numbers as well, because I think that's probably more representative of what we're going to see post-pandemic. So.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to be thinking about as well. But in terms of providing ridership data on a regular basis, whether it's quarterly or semi-annually or monthly, I think that's an interesting idea personally. But
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair, and honestly, to my friend Deb, who's had an open invitation to have a conversation in her back deck that we haven't done yet. We're gonna have to do it in maybe where there's still snow on the ground, but I look forward to that. I would love to partner with Deb, and this is why I reached out to her. I think that the STA report can just be an add-on to her report, and we can work together on it. It's not a territorial thing. It's just an opportunity to have a little bit of time to share what's going on in the suburban providers in a little more detail. And then, and the initial thought was for TAB to have the executive directors actually go through their presentations. But from a more efficiency standpoint, I certainly am not, averse to the idea of them providing me the information and I'll present it. It doesn't matter who presents. I just want to be able to have this group have the knowledge and the education of what's going on in our fast growing suburbs with regard to transit. Clearly, Express is not fastly growing. It took a beating during the pandemic, but it's beginning to show signs. And we know as soon as the downtown employers come back, that's going to light up, and it's probably going to light up in March and April. And so we're excited about that. But our on-demand service and our local service has been growing. We've got constant needs in our systems for providing, point A to point B for workforce and transportation within our suburbs. And that's a big cost pressure and a demand for us, and as part of our planning. And we're excited about our on-demand MVTA Connect and Southwest Prime. That on-demand is just exploding in growth, and it's pretty exciting. But I just never have a chance to tell anybody on TAB that story. So I'm just asking for a few minutes to be able to share all this good news and what our challenges are as well. Thank you so much.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Member Keeley. And let's not forget that regardless of how you happen to be on the tab, we've got the end of the meeting to be able to provide supplemental reports as well. Where we're asking for information from tab members. So keep that in mind too. All right, let's move on to TAC Chair Solberg.
Chair Hovland, I think there's another hand up. I see Member Lewis has his hand up.
Member Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Member Barber. My question is, are there plans or contingency plans of sorts to ramp up service, either Metro Transit or suburban providers, to react to downtown employers bringing folks back? Is that planned out for March service updates, potentially summer, anything in between there?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, it's going to, for us, I can tell you that we're looking at it on an ongoing basis, because we do quarterly picks with our operators, and so we're trying to be as ahead of it as we can possibly be. Of course, my concern is things start to ramp up faster than we're ready to react, and so I ask a lot of those same questions, but I can tell you it's a lot of it moving in real time, and our planners are very on top of things. I think we definitely need to learn a little bit more about what return to work is going to look like. We know it's going to be different because travel behaviors just in general are changing, and we know that there's going to be more of a hybrid work approach, and we're just not sure what that means to us yet. And so, but we've been trying to be reactive throughout and as quickly and as nimbly as we can. Definitely does present some challenges, because not only are we seeing changes in days that people are traveling by transit, but we're seeing the patterns really change, where you're not seeing those peak rush hour times. You're seeing different peaks during the day. So there's a lot of analysis that's going into it, and I can tell you we're looking at it constantly. But I wouldn't. I do worry that things start to return and we're not fast enough. And so, put out my additional plea again of, if anybody who's looking for a really good job, Metro Transit, I'm sure the suburban providers and the contractor services are all looking for operators. So that is one thing that we'll need to keep on the radar as well as we start to ramp service back up.
Thank you. And then I'm going to jump over to Member Keeley quickly so he could respond for the suburban transit providers to Member Lewis's question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and a lot of things that Ms. Barber hit on, we have the same challenges. We are staying in very close contact with all of the major employers in downtown, and we're getting, some feedback on what their plans are, and then it's usually in the news as well shortly after that. But it's been something we've been expecting for a while, and it keeps getting delayed, right? I mean, first it was going to be this, then it got moved back 30 days, and another 60 days, and another. So we've been sort of in prep mode to increase our service cycles for 6 months, basically, or more. And I'm sure Ms. Barber and Metro Transit, same, right? So we're just holding in there. So we've got 40% of the trips on Marquette, which mostly are all the express routes coming in, come from suburban transit providers, and 6,000 rides a day to Minneapolis on MVTA express routes alone. Riders, sorry, not rides, that's people. So we're hoping that comes back, and it very well could, just to your point, come back in a flurry, where 3 or 4 or 5 major employers all announce they want 3 or 4 days a week in person in downtown, and we see a quick spike, sort of a jump in the ridership. But we're prepared. We've talked about it. We talk about it as a board on MBTA and the STA calls, and we're prepped and ready. So it just hopefully it's not a 2-day notice, right? Hopefully the employer is saying, hey, and it has been. We're planning on calling people back on this day, and there's been usually a 30-day notice or more. So hopefully that maintains.
All right, thank you, Member Keeley. Did that trigger any questions or thoughts from other tab members? All right. Let's move on now to Chair Solberg from the TAC, and he's got some information to impart to the tab about some of the amendments to the TAC bylaws, and then I think we'll also have him cover that first streamlined matter that's in the consent portion of the business agenda. Chair Solberg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, the TAC has heard all the information items in front of you, as well as the consent and non-consent action items for you. Briefly, I'll go over a couple of things. The TAC bylaws. We at the TAC started last spring revising our TAC bylaws. In part, the main reason for that was, or why we undertook that was to incorporate working groups for transit and bike ped that act as more subject matter experts that can provide direct detail expertise to our broader technical groups. But as that was brought forward, we realized there were some other pieces that we wanted to make improvements on in the TAC bylaws. A couple of those things really are, well, number one was really to add a public opportunity for input in TAC, in the TAC process. So early we've adjusted our agenda so that is now available and is an opportunity again for public to speak to those action items in front of TAC. In addition to that, we had been noticing difficulty getting volunteers for the TAC various committees for chairs. And so we reduced the term from 3 years to 2 years to hopefully get more people interested in that opportunity. And then beyond that, we did do a couple other major items I think that are worth calling out, and that is we had a bike ped representative on TAC. We've split that now into having one bike and one pedestrian representative on the team, and those are recommended to TAC by the work groups. And then in addition to that, we've added a DNR representative to the TAC group. And that covers most of the highlights of our changes to the TAC bylaws. We did adopt those bylaws in the last month. On to the streamlined tip amendment that sits in front of the committee here this morning on the consent agenda is a streamlined tip amendment on US 52 for MnDOT, and really to simplify that, what we're talking about is an administrative change where during project development, the description of the project went forward with just those permanent improvements in the project. So where we were replacing, doing the concrete improvements, the portion, unfortunately, that was left out was those temporary changes for traffic control, which require the traffic on one side of the road to be switched to the other side. And that adds up to about a half mile on each side. So the request in front of you under the consent agenda is to change, change the limits of that project. And that really concludes most of my comments for you right now. Chair, I will go through the other projects in the non-consent agenda when that comes up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Any questions for Chair Solberg? All right, thanks, Chair Solberg. The next item before us in the business portion of the agenda is the subsection on consent items. There's two items in the consent portion of the agenda. If no one has any questions, let me ask it this way. Does anyone have any questions or let's do it this way. Any proposed modification to the minutes? Anybody have any questions with regard to 2022-11, which is the streamlined tip amendment that Chair Solberg just discussed involving the US Highway 52 median crossovers? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the items on the consent agenda.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second,
Member
Karwoski.
Malushnik moves, Member Karwoski, Commissioner Karwoski seconds adoption of the consent agenda items. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, Ms. Ernst.
Bailey,
Aye.
Barber,
Aye.
Barnes,
Aye.
Crimmins,
Aye.
Dugan, Foster,
Aye.
Geisler,
Aye.
Julani Stevens,
Aye.
Anderson, and for Gotel,
Aye.
Hanson,
Aye.
Holberg,
Yes.
Hollinshead,
Aye.
Jepson,
Aye.
Karwoski,
Aye.
Karwoski.
Try that. Aye.
Gotcha, thanks. Keeley,
Aye.
Koski, Koski, Lewis,
Aye.
Lindicky,
Yes.
Look,
Aye.
Maluchnik,
Aye.
Martinson,
Aye.
Metis Castillo, Buin,
Aye.
Narayanan,
Aye.
Dietrich,
Aye.
Stephenson,
Aye.
Ulrich,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Windshuttle,
Aye.
and Uterman.
Thank you. We have an approval on the consent agenda items. I think some of our county commissioners are out in the East Coast. I got a call from Commissioner Gattell this morning who was on her way home, so I suspect that's where a couple of them are. Hearing Peter Dugan's name called by Jenna Ernst reminded me that I wanted to let you all know the reason for his absence today was his daughter, Kate, is graduating this week from the FBI Academy. So pretty remarkable achievement for this young lady who's, I've met her a couple of times and she's just a remarkable young person. And so her first assignment is going to be Detroit. And she'll be back in town next week. And congratulations to him. And we got a chance to, let's remember to congratulate him next month when we see him. All right, on to the non-consent agenda items. We've got two of those, 2022-08 and 2022-09, and Chair Solberg will take those one at a time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the first item, 2208 in front of you, is a request by Washington County for a program year extension of a HSIP Highway Safety Improvement Program project that they received funding for in 2020. Really, the reason for this project is it was originally out in a later program year. They moved available in 2022, so they moved it forward. However, late in 2021, Washington County and our Commissioner Stan Karwoski approved the local funding sales tax, which allowed that section of the roadway to receive a mill and overlay. They're moving fast and furious to deliver that pavement project. And in doing so, this federal project, again, federal funds for the HSIP funding is being requested to move back so that it doesn't conflict with a locally funded project on the roadway. Again, the request here is to move that project back from 22 to 23. As per policy, the funding for that project will become available later on in the program, as we've seen with many of the other projects when they move program years. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
All right, any questions for Chair Solberg? I'm going to turn to Commissioner Karwoski if he had any comments. I imagine he'd also like to move the matter.
Well, I think John described it perfectly. The county's committed to doing this project in 2023. So we'll try to more than likely get the reimbursement in future years for that rumble strips.
All right,
We
good.
appreciate support for the project.
All right, you want to move the matter?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I move that the Transportation Advisory Board approve Washington County's program year extension request to move its CASA 15 rumble strip and striping project SP number 082-615-4045 from fiscal year 2022 to fiscal year 2023.
Wind shuttle
Thank you.
second.
Mayor Winchell seconds. Yeah, somebody that was on their phone was, we were picking up a lot of highway noise or something, so I'm glad they went on mute. We got a motion by Commissioner Karwoski, second by Mayor Winchell. Any further discussion with regard to 2208? Roll call, please, Ms. Ernst.
Bailey,
Aye.
Barber,
Aye.
Barnes,
Aye.
Crimmins,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Geisler,
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens.
Aye.
Thank you. Cattell.
Aye.
Oh, sorry, Anderson. Thanks, Kevin. Hanson,
Aye.
Holberg,
Yes.
Hollinshead,
Aye.
Jepson,
Aye.
Karwoski,
Aye.
Healy,
Aye.
Koski. Koski, I'll check the chat. We got you down for the
Aye.
last one too. Thank you. Let's see. Lewis.
Aye.
Linda Key.
Aye.
Look.
Aye.
Maluchnik.
Aye.
Martinson.
Aye.
Buin.
Aye.
Naryanan.
Aye.
Petrick.
Aye.
Aye.
Stephenson.
Aye.
Ulrich.
Aye.
Williams.
Aye.
Windshuttle.
Aye.
And Uterman.
Aye.
All right, 2208 is approved. Thank you, everybody. And now 2209, Chair Solberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The item before you, 2209, is a request by Dakota County to again request a program year extension, much like the last project, and then to approve an amendment to the tip reflecting a cost change to the project. This project was originally solicited in the regional solicitation in 2018 for a trail project for, again, the North Creek Greenway project. In 2020, the county finished some additional work with consultants on the project development, and that did result in and revealed that there were poor soil conditions, additional wetland and floodplain conditions that they had to deal with, which again affected bridge locations and extensions, as well as site prep. So during the project, the county has now, because of those additional considerations due to the site, needs additional time for developing the project. It's also, again, driven the cost upwards on the project. That being said, the county did, again, solicit for that length of project and received those federal funds through the regional solicitation. They are not asking for additional federal funds as part of this request. They will cover that with local costs to, again, construct that North Creek Greenway. And again, simplified, it's a request to move that a year back due to the complications of design and to allow the cost increase to move forward, knowing that the county is not asking for additional federal and covering the remaining costs of the project. Stand for any questions.
Good. Thank you, Chair Holberg. Questions for, excuse me, Chair Solberg. And I'm going to also go to Member Holberg to see if she has any comments.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any comments. Lakeville's famous for water running out of sides of hills and being found in unexpected places. So if there's no additional questions, I would move approval of the item.
All right, thank you for that proviso. Any questions for Chair Solberg? All right, Member Holberg moves the matter. Is there a second? Mayor Williams seconds the adoption of 2022-09. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, with respect to potential approval of 2209.
Bailey,
Aye.
Barber,
Aye.
Barnes,
Aye.
Crimmins,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Geisler,
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens,
Aye.
Anderson,
Aye.
Hanson,
Aye.
Holberg,
Yes.
Hollinshead,
Aye.
Jepson,
Aye.
Karwoski,
Aye.
Keeley,
Aye.
Koski,
Aye.
Lewis,
Aye.
Lindicky,
Yes.
Look,
Aye.
Luchnik,
Aye.
Martinson,
Aye.
Ewan,
Aye.
Naryanan,
Aye.
Petrick,
Aye.
Stephenson,
Aye.
Ulrich,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Windshuttle,
Aye.
and Uterman, I think, left. Uterman, are you here? Okay, that's it, Chair.
All right, good. Thank you. We have unanimous approval on 2209. Thank you, everybody. Now we're going to go to the information portion of the agenda, and the first matter there is an update on what we call the TPP, the Transportation Policy Plan. The amendment to that plan, Steve Peterson and Cole Hineker from the council have this matter.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. There it is. There's the PowerPoint. So you may remember when this came before you, before it was released for public comment. Next slide here, please. This was an amendment for really two things. One was to bring in a series of arterial bus rapid transit corridors into the plan. It also was to add 6 highway freight projects that are awarded by MnDOT through their highway freight program. So we released that for public comment December 9th through the 24th. Did receive 40 comments. We'll go through those briefly here today. Next slide.
All right, thank you.
So the first on the ABRT comments, a lot of good comments there. The one we'll focus on in the end is the one that we're recommending for a change. That was from the city of Bloomington. We'll come back to that. Next slide. Now on to the 6 freight projects, 24 commenters, all on that Highway 212 corridor, pretty strong corridor coalition. And I particularly appreciated that the mayor of Granite Falls even wrote a letter. So halfway to South Dakota. But so all supportive of that particular project, which was one of the 6 projects. Next slide, please. And then, similar to other public comment periods that we do have for the TIP or the regional solicitation, members of the public also see this as a great opportunity to tell the council other feelings they have on a wide variety of topics. So we've grouped those here, everything from increasing transit funding to commission concerns about greenhouse gases with our transportation system, among others. So all good comments, and we do keep track of those as we go into the next, for instance, transportation policy plan. These are great comments for us to think about and respond to and do further study on. Next slide. And now lastly, the one change that we're recommending, we did in the proposed TPP amendment, one corridor, the American Boulevard corridor, was recommended to be pulled from what we call the increased revenue scenario. So that's if we do receive more money, where would you put it? And that was based on Network Next recommendations from Metro Transit. Since that time, the city of Bloomington did write a letter and did commit to doing a transitway study on American Boulevard. And given the unique nature of that corridor, I think we have 4 or 5 different transitways coming together right around that area. And the city of Bloomington committing financial resources to do a further study. Our recommendation was to keep that American Boulevard corridor in the increased revenue scenario. So there's no funding to build the project yet, but there is a piece of that called a transitway to be studied. So in the increased revenue scenario, as a transitway to be studied is the recommendation there. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions for Steve Peterson? All right, good. Thanks for that update. That was succinct and really informative. Appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, let's move on then to the next matter, which is the Twin Cities Highway Mobility Needs Analysis. And Steve Peterson has this as well, along with Paul Zeck, who is joining us from MnDOT. Paul, nice to have you here with us. And we've also had some correspondence. I don't know if Lane has gotten to all of the tab members, but one of our members has written a letter along with some other folks to the governor and to the Met Council. Ash Narayanan and Sam Rockwell from Move Minnesota as well has some concerns, and I'm sure that Member Narayanan will discuss those when this presentation is concluded, and we'll have a little discussion about the purpose of this particular needs analysis from both Steve Peterson and from Paul Zeck. So Steve, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Again, this is an information item we're bringing to you. We thought it was an interesting study, and certainly we've had a lot of good conversations about highway mobility over the last 6 months or longer, and probably will into the future. So again, this is an information item. We're not no action here today, but more of a curiosity to bring some of the work that we've been doing in this area to you. So next slide, please. This was a consultant study that was wrapped up here last year, and it was co-sponsored by MnDOT and the Met Council. You could see that on the first slide was the consultant team, which was led by SRF Consulting, who's on the line here too. So as far as the study background, this is a precursor to what is called MnCHIP. That's MnDOT's 20-year highway investment plan. And what that does is it uses highway performance measures to distribute funding based on need, and then also public input. So currently there's performance measures for bridges and pavements and things like that that have been very well defined, but no such performance measure for highway mobility. And so that was really the task of this study. Currently, in the current 2017 version of MnCHIP, we do have a need for Twin Cities highway mobility, $4.58 billion over the 20-year time frame. But again, that's the need. And as far as the resources that are being allocated through that MnCHIP process, again, we have a need in there of $4.58 billion, but only $50 million per year is going towards Twin Cities highway mobility through MnCHIP. And in fact, that money runs out in 2026, and it'll go down to $0. So, so right now, the way that we came up with that $4.58 billion over 20 years was we added up the total cost of a series of projects that we'd like to do in this region, like building out the Easy Pass system, interchanges, et cetera, and that totaled up to $4.58 billion. So that's kind of a very different methodology than what we use for pavements, where we could say we want to have X% of our pavements in poor condition. It's going to cost us this much money to get there, and that formulates the need for pavements. So again, this is a precursor going into the MnDOT's MnCHIP process, and that's really a good place if people love highway mobility projects or don't love it or kind of love it, any of it. The MnCHIP process will come back to you, or MnDOT will come back to you over the course of the next 18 months and really get your feedback on if you love pavements, bridges, bike ped, or something in between. We'll have plenty of discussions moving forward. Next slide, please. So one of the interesting things we want to point out is the second bullet point here on the slide. So whatever comes out of MnCHIP, whatever dollar figure comes out for Twin Cities highway mobility, how that money is used is really up to the region and this regional planning process, the council, the TAB, MnDOT, public stakeholder input. And there's really a wide range of what highway mobility could mean for the region. It could mean upgrading your traffic signals. It could mean turn lanes. It could mean roundabouts. It could mean easy pass. Or for instance, 2 of the next 3 arterial bus rapid transit projects are on MnDOT system. It could mean improvements to help move people in that fashion on MnDOT system. So those are all discussions to be had in the future once we know what the dollar figure is, and hope that this group will help kind of shape that conversation. Next slide. So this, just to repeat, this was the first time in the region that we've done this. So the council and the MnDOT developed a performance-based approach to highway mobility investment, and performance-based planning is something that we're asked to do by the federal government. And this took really a focused look at just one of MnDOT's capital investment areas. So it was purposefully very focused in its nature to answer that difficult question, which we hadn't answered before, about performance measures and targets and how would we get there. And then maybe the most important bullet point of the whole presentation, the needs number that we came up with is not a plan for future spending. So you'll see in a few slides, the number gets quite big. It's $4 to $6 billion, which is essentially what it is right now. It stays in that same ballpark, $4 to $6 billion over a 20-year time period. But then all these needs numbers across these 14 investment areas then have to think about the available resources, and then stakeholder input will say we need to do more of this, less of this, more of that. So for instance, in the current MnSHIP, the needs number, which is huge, is 18 billion larger than the money that we have available. So you can see that needs number is very different than what we end up spending in the end. And then lastly, and we'll touch on this a few times, Paul and I through the presentation, is one thing that we've heard very loud and clear from our stakeholders through our processes is a need to further study the connection between highway mobility types and greenhouse gas emissions by project type, by location in the region, urban core, suburban, exurban, and rural. And we've allocated money to do that. Last year, we allocated money to do that. And that work, which is the logical next step of this study, will take place in 2022. So we'll have, I guess, plenty of good analysis on that very focused question. Next slide. So one of the reasons why we're continuing to study highway mobility in this region is the growth that we're expecting. The modeling effort that we did as part of this study went out to 2040, because that's our current TPP goes out to 2040. And the modeled results show that if we stop making any investment in highway mobility, the total delay that's expected in this region is going to increase by about 33%. And that's largely because we're having a lot more people. And if you look out to 2050, we're going to add another 800,000 people to this region, and on roughly the same roadway system. So, there's no new beltway planned, or largely the state highway map that you have of the metro area is what you're going to see in 2050. And so you can just see how population growth does make a difference. Next slide. So here's the results of the study, and a lot on one slide here. But again, this was a very focused effort looking at capital highway investment for MnDOT's MnSHIP process. The 20-year cost that we quantified now in a much more kind of calculated way is about the same as we had before. But as we kind of broaden this to the TPP and we think about the whole region and other modes, I think we all can agree that one, we don't have this amount of money. I mean, even if we did have this amount of money, we probably wouldn't spend this amount of money. Now we know that a range of solutions, from travel demand management, transit, bike ped, land use changes, further densifying the region, the combination of all those things are very important as we think about systems and trying to get around this metro area that is going to continue to grow. And telework is a great example right there. What we saw at the height of the pandemic, it really made a difference in congestion across the region. Next slide. So in our info items moving forward, we're always going to try and make that connection back to TAB. And why is it? What does this study mean for you? So one of the ways that you are funding highway mobility project on MnDOT system is through the regional solicitation, which you'll have an opportunity to make a decision on here in November. In the past, we've seen a trend of the cities and counties leading planning efforts, as well as partially funding mobility projects on systems that they don't own, on MnDOT system. In fact, since 2014, 10 different cities and 7 counties have been awarded funding, mobility funding on MnDOT system. Most of those have been interchanges. But as I said before, mobility projects have a pretty wide swath of what they could be. Other projects that you funded recently would be the Lexington Parkway extension in the city of St. Paul, the realignment there. 77th Street underpass in the city of Richfield. I think they wanted to do that for about 2 decades, so made a better connection under Cedar Avenue. And the Helmo-Bielenberg Bridge is another great example of a mobility project, and that's what the Gold Line will run on between Woodbury and Oakdale. Next slide, please. Another connection back to this group is our transportation policy plan. And again, we're going to be drafting chapters in 2023. So this group will be heavily involved there. Currently in our highway chapter, we have a priorities list. And so when people have a mobility issue on their corridor, we ask them to think about it in this way. First, think about travel demand management and traffic management technologies. Those are more like signal timing and other technologies. Then spot mobility, lower cost treatments, then Easy Pass, and then last but not least would be strategic capacity enhancements. And so this priority hierarchy is what we followed in this study. So the first thing we did was we started doing we added more telework into the model, then we added more signal timing, and then we added lower cost treatments, and then built up the Easy Pass system. And so it was that order which we used and likely help contribute to some of the positive outcomes that you'll see in the upcoming slides. Next, please. So where does this particular highway investment type fit with our both MnDOT and the council's plans? Since this is tab, we'll focus here on the TPP, and the second box down is the 5 TPP goals that we do have. So the connections here are access to destinations, and you'll see some accessibility to jobs information come forward here. And then competitive economy. In this context, that means freight movement through the region and from a trucking freight perspective. So the goal isn't necessarily travel time delay reduction. The goal is access to destinations. The goal we're trying to achieve is better freight movements throughout the region. Next slide. And with this, I think I will turn it over to my colleague, Paul Zak.
Thank you, Steve. Mr. Chair and members, I'm going to build off of Steve's comments, and in the interest of time, I'm going to try and move quickly and highlight some of the key results of this work and recommendations, as Steve said, specific to highway mobility. So we opted to measure highway mobility expressed as delay per capita, in part because it was relatively easy to understand and could be applied at both the regional and corridor levels, that supports economic analyses and helps depict how highway mobility supports broader transportation goals. Next slide, please. Using the regional travel demand model, we modeled the results for each investment on the state highway system. And as you can see, and probably not surprisingly, the annual delay per person decreases with increasing investment scenarios. You'll note that we use 2018 as our base year. If we were to implement the most aggressive investment scenario, the needs scenario, we would improve 24 conditions as compared to 2018, whereas all the other scenarios would result in an increase in congestion. Next slide, please. We also looked at results for accessibility to jobs, and as one would hope, we also see a gradual improvement in job accessibility with increasing amounts of investment. Next slide, please. In addition, we looked at results for vehicles miles traveled, VMT, and each investment scenario yields similar results, and we'll explain that a little bit in the next slide, please. There are a number of things that contribute to this result, but the second bullet is probably the biggest factor. The methodology follows the 2040 TPP, with the main driver of VMT being population growth. And as we all know, this region is projected to have significant population growth over the next 20 years. Next slide, please. We also did some freight analysis, and what you see here are modeled results that show with each level of increasing investment that we improve freight bottleneck locations, which is what I think we would hope and expect to happen. Next slide, please. We did some limited equity analysis, including how job accessibility of equity populations differ for each funding scenario. What we found is that the number of jobs added as a result of investment in highway mobility was similar across income, race, and ethnic groups. We also looked at the impact of each funding scenario on transit delay, and found that transit delay decreased with more investment in highway mobility. Again, I think something that we would hope would happen. Next slide, please. We also conducted a telecommute sensitivity analysis in light of the COVID pandemic. As indicated on this slide, we consider different levels of telecommuting. I think it is important to recognize that there are other ways to potentially improve highway mobility in addition to capital investments. Next slide, please. And we could move to the next slide. Thank you. This brings us back to where Steve started us, which again is a recommendation that we settle on a Twin Cities highway mobility need target of 40 hours delay per person per year to calculate our 20-year capital highway investment need. This would improve highway mobility as compared to 2018, and much more so than if we did not invest in mobility. Of course, there would be a cost to achieve this level of mobility, which we estimate costing somewhere between $4 and $6 billion over 20 years. As Steve indicated at the outset, we plan to use this information to help inform the update of MnDOT's MnSHIP Capital Investment Highway Plan. Next slide, please. And although this slide is a little busy, I do think it does a nice job of capturing the results of this effort. The columns show the performance level information you would expect from each level of investment. In addition to delay, travel time savings, job accessibility, time saving benefits, and freight information, it also explains that greenhouse gas emissions are not greatly influenced by these different levels of investment. But as Steve said, we recognize that more study is needed in this area. Furthermore, this chart does show that what we expect the associated risks are with each level of investment, which is something that we really do for all investment categories in MnSHIP. So this was an important part of our task. Next slide, please. So some of the key takeaways from this analysis include, if we don't invest more in mobility, we will see an increase in future delay for travelers. If we pursue the most aggressive investment scenario that meets the mobility target of a 5% decrease in delay, there would be a number of benefits, including improved job accessibility, travel time savings, addressing freight bottlenecks, reducing delay for transit users. Please keep in mind that while the purpose of the study was to focus on capital highway investment approach, we do recognize that a range of multimodal solutions will be needed if we're going to meet the target. And although not part of the original scope of this work, the study does recognize that increased telework can effectively reduce delay. And with that, the next slide, please. I'm going to turn it back to Steve to wrap things up.
Yeah, thank you. Next slide. So we have a number of similar topic area planning studies that are ongoing. So we thought we'd at least bring that back up because we're doing actually a lot of work in this area. You heard last month from Tony Fisher from our staff on the electric vehicle planning study. The congestion management handbook, which is going to focus on lower cost alternatives for mobility, is something we'll bring back to you shortly. We're doing a regional travel demand management study. And as I mentioned before, kind of an exciting next step to this study is the regional transportation and climate change measures. effort that we'll be starting here in 2022. And then maybe lastly, on page here's MnDOT's MnShift effort. And so we'll have several presentations from MnDOT staff, and you can weigh in on a variety of scenarios that they'll develop, similar to the regional association sorts, where they'll group different amounts of money for different investment areas, and you can weigh in on if you like more or less of different investment types. So I think a good year or two ahead of us in this area, and much more work to be done, obviously. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Paul. I think one of the things I really appreciate about the sort of foresightful work that you are doing is that, and recently being at the U.S. Conference of Mayors midwinter meeting, Secretary Buttigieg was there. And of course, we all recognize that transportation is the #1 producer of greenhouse gases. He characterizes that as a significant responsibility to on the part of the transportation industry and all its related components to do something about that greenhouse gas reduction. So what I see in all of or a lot of the work that you're doing is a recognition of that very problem and trying to figure out how we're going to be cleaner and greener in the future, but still allow for mobility to exist at the levels needed to be able to have a productive, efficient economy. I'm sure that some of our members have some comments or questions, and I'll turn to our colleagues now to see if anybody has any comments or questions relative to this work that's being done by MnDOT and the Met Council. Member Barber?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple quick comments. First, I really want to thank Steve and Paul and their teams for this work. I think it's actually very important to help inform some of the work that we do. We know that the region is expected to add over 800,000 people by 2050, and congestion and delays are frustrating regardless of what mode you use, and highway congestion matters to many people, including the policymakers around the region. We also know there are differing views on highway mobility investment, that people either want to see more or less of this investment type. We know that communities in the urban core are removing traffic lanes on their urban streets. At the same time, many of our suburban, exurban, and rural local cities and counties are leading studies and making large financial investments in highway mobility projects on MnDOT's system. This study provides additional data about the expected outcomes, such as job accessibility, freight bottlenecks improvements of this type of investment. As Steve mentioned, this is not a plan for investment. Previously, what had been done was we estimated a need rather than using analysis-based performance planning. When you look at what we did, even with the Network Next of prioritizing our ABRTs, we took a data-driven look at how we prioritize things so we knew how to direct investment. This work is similar to that, where it helps inform where investment should be, and said rather than just adding up what isn't funded in the metropolitan region, it gives us some parameters to look at, and as we're looking at projects and where we want to direct our investments. And so by establishing this type of performance-based metric, highway congestion in the region can be evaluated alongside pavement conditions, bridges, and other system metrics. It doesn't establish a funding plan or prioritization of this need above others. Instead, it establishes this as one of many factors for the planning for the future regional transportation system. We talk often about how there's a need to have additional mobility funding available for the metropolitan region, but it's always been challenging to argue that because we've just been looking at what are the costs of the projects rather than what are the actual needs. What this plan does helps us actually outline what the needs are so that we can make sure that we are looking and trying to get investment in the right areas that will benefit the region the most.
Great. Thanks, Member Barber. Member Lindeke, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just a comment. I've been waiting a few months now as this item kept popping up on our agenda, and we got busy, which, you know, but I've been thinking about it for a little while. Sort of as a big picture scholar looking at the history of cities and transportation, this is like my least favorite kind of traffic engineering analysis. The idea that the difference between one funding scenario in this analysis and another is, you know, in a per day level, just 30 seconds of a commute that someone might make on a freeway 20 years from now. And the idea that we can know how much time someone's going to be spending in traffic in 20 years, down to the second, is just sort of silly to me. I don't think that our assumptions that we're making, they can change so quickly. And the perfect example of that is right in front of us with the COVID pandemic. I don't think any of us 2 years ago would have guessed how much our workplace lives have shifted so quickly. And I'm really interested in the consultant's analysis of how telecommuting, flex work schedules, working from home, how much that would shift those bar charts that reflect the billions of dollars of investment, right? How many how much does a 35% change in commuting patterns alter this analysis? And if it's significant, I don't know why we're even making this kind of study, because workplace patterns will shift a lot between now and 2040. I think a lot of, if you talk to any employer in the Twin Cities, they'll tell you all sorts of things about how demand and desires from employees are differing than what they were just a few years ago. And so I think making the big assumptions and using them to justify billions of dollars worth of investment based on, I think by now antiquated sort of modeling, it's just odd to me. And I don't really like this approach to thinking about investing in our future. So that's just my 2 cents on it.
All right, thank you. Those are important comments. I'm going to turn now to Member Lewis and then Member Foster, then Member Martinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My question is related to Member Lindeke's comment. What was the impetus for the study in the first place? Was this something we do on a consistent basis? Is there something or some sets of actions that drove us doing it at this time? It seemed to come somewhat out of the blue from my perspective, and maybe I missed something in that regard, but I just like to hear like what led us to do this at this time, bring it forward at this time, given some of the other competing circumstances we have out there.
All right, Paul or Steve?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. It's a great question. The reason we did this, we knew Minship was coming up, and as we articulated previously, many, if not most of the investment areas like pavement and bridges all do this performance-based planning, and it's something that's stressed by both the DOTs and FHWA to do performance-based planning. So we hadn't done this before, and so there was kind of an obvious gap in our planning process, and so this was a hole to be filled. And since this was an area that was more unique to the metro area, they're not experiencing the same level of congestion issues in the rest of the state. It made sense prior to this Minship to put some data behind what was before, as Chair Barber said, just a list of projects with a total project cost. So now at least I think we're better than we were before, and people can argue whether, like I said, you like mobility projects or something else to be done with MnDOT's money. That's a great conversation to be had, but I think we're certainly in a better place than 2 years ago on this from a analytical standpoint.
Any follow-on, Member Lewis?
No, that's helpful. I see Member Barber has her hand raised potentially to further comment.
I thought there was some, just a moment. I thought there was some allusion to a federal requirement. I thought I heard that in one of the comments that either you or Paul made. Is there a federal requirement here to do something like this, or is this something that we chose to do because there was a obvious gap in this analysis?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to briefly answer your question before I turn to Chair Barber, it's not a federal requirement that we would do this. FHWA does encourage MPOs to do performance-based planning like this, but there's not a specific charge or requirement to do it.
All right, thank you, Chair Barber, and then I'll go to Member Foster.
Thank you. And I will also say I think Member Barnes might have a response on this too, because I saw his hand go up about the same time as mine. To me also, not just informing Minship, I think it's also helping to inform the transportation policy plan. So we're just beginning to build and work on what will be the next version of Thrive. And this is one piece of it. Obviously, there are multiple things in the transportation policy plan where our priorities get reflected, but this is something that's more tangible that can be future groups and can take and look at this from a critical perspective to be able to at least put metrics behind it. Like I said, it's not an investment plan, but it does help inform our decisions, and this information will be very helpful in the transportation policy plan development for the next cycle. So I'll turn it over to Member Barnes, I think.
I'll go back over to Member Barnes now for a MnDOT perspective.
Yeah, I think again, my comments are on several of them that have been recently mentioned when it's like, why are we doing this when there's probably some other alternatives, like it's been saying from the, having this measure and then having something where you can compare. So if there's going to be policies, if all of a sudden it's one where it's not just from a project perspective, if we are looking at ways to reduce the delay, what are some of those options? And then there is, there's at least some things to compare and having a metric that is there. And I think it's been emphasized several times. And I think the group that worked on it to try to get this one, we're starting, especially when there's going to be potential funds that come in, to be able to see all the different investment categories, and then what some of those we look at, either projects, corridors, investment strategies, not as just a department, but as a region, you've got, again, the metrics and the kind of a needs bucket. So that's all I wanted to add. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Member Barnes. I'm going to go back over to Member Foster now, then Member Martinson next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there an equivalent delay estimate for transit riders? Is this something we measure, or public transit? I don't know who to direct that question to. I guess Steve, or maybe you, or other folks?
Did you ask the question again? So I don't know if I understood.
Yeah, so it's focused a lot on reducing delay, and I'm wondering if we study delay time for transit riders.
It's somewhat built into it, and I'll let Steve correct me, but really it is one of the factors, because especially when we're talking about anything that's on the MnDOT system, which includes, some of our BRTs, but also some of our express service and even some of our local and ABRT routes. So if we're looking at some of this, that is one of the factors. I mean, obviously, I'm a transit person. I'm a very big transit advocate. I want as many people on buses and trains as possible, but congestion does impact transit as well. And so it's something that, yes, to me, we have to look at both. We have to look at getting as many people on buses, but also making sure the buses can move. And so it's kind of a combined effort that in the long-term planning, you have to look at it from that sort of holistic perspective. Otherwise, you're forsaking one for the other, which isn't the intention.
Member Foster, before you ask your follow-on question, I think there's something on slide 16 on that very issue. I want to look at that before, or in conjunction with asking your next question.
Mr. Chair, this is Cole. Can I also chime in there?
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Henniker.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, we've been looking at variety of ways to measure delay for transit users. I don't think we've settled on there's certain assumptions in the study, but in terms of trying to find a great measure for that, it's really difficult, because so much of how you might measure delay is built into how well you write your schedules. Sometimes delay is a factor of whether it's going against the schedule, but we actually adjust the schedules if there's delays built into routes. So that's been something we've been struggling with for a long time, but we're certainly always exploring that and trying to determine best ways to measure, the user experience of delay on transit.
Member Foster, go ahead.
I guess I have two sort of follow-up comments. How long you're in delay is also true for someone who drives a car. Like, they can choose how early they leave for work. They can choose when to leave. They can choose what routes to take if they're going to take side roads. So I think, like, yes, it's different for riders, but also the same is true for someone who drives a car. My original question was though, like if we can say, sorry, I need to pull this slide up. Right now, that the target is 40 hours of annual delay per person. Does that mean that someone who takes the bus or train regularly will face 40 hours of delay in a year, or is it that we can't measure that for someone who takes transit?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Amity. You're making some great points here. This was focused on drivers. We did measure transit delay, and as you build out the Easy Pass system, and then you reduce some of the spillover from the freeways to the side streets where transit are. We did find positive impacts. If you want to benefit transit, the best way to do it is just fund transit. It's probably not to fund highway projects. But, that was one thing that we did look into because people were asking, what's the impact of transit? But certainly, yeah, if you want to fund better transit routes, you should just fund probably transit. But this was a highway focus for MnDOT, so that's why we focused on the user experience for drivers. Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Cole, any add-on to that?
No, other than my response is more not focused on the study, but just how we're trying to look at transit rider delay overall, and trying. I think to answer your question, we don't necessarily have a great measure. It's a really difficult concept to measure, but we are working on it regularly, and we could certainly share some information with you, Amity.
All right, I'm going to go to Member Martinson, then on to Commissioner Look, and then Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to, I guess, add on to sort of part of what Bill Lindeke's comment was about this, in that I've been doing healthcare related research and public health research for about the past 25 years. And one of the most consistent things that I've noted is that when you set a metric in place, that's where the energy goes. That's where the resources go. And if you don't set a metric, then it doesn't happen. And so I'm concerned about this framing of the issue. The words that we use are important, and the metrics that we set are determinative of how resources go. And so I think that this question about mobility or congestion is not particularly useful for how we think about these things. And in addition to that, I would note that back in the middle of December, the FHWA offered guidance on how they wanted to see states and other funding recipients of the BIL funding in particular, but I think that their goal is to see this mentality and how we think about things change more broadly. They set a variety of targets that they wanted these funding recipients of those funds to be focusing on. And mobility and congestion is not mentioned among them, but the things that are focused on are encouraging states to invest funding in projects that upgrade the conditions of streets, highways, and bridges and make them safer for all users, for all modes of transit or transportation that are being used, to make them more sustainable and resilient to climate change, to make them more equitable. These are all metrics. These are all things and targets that we could be going after. They're talking about improving the resiliency and the safety of our transportation systems while making them more equitable and also more sustainable against environmental change, as well as reconnecting communities, including disadvantaged and underrepresented groups. This is a whole hassle of metrics and targets that we could be focusing on that would tell us how we should be using the money from the Fed that's coming, whether it be BIL money or other money from the Fed. So I just want to register that as we should really pay attention to that guidance from the FHWA. Thanks.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, Member Martinson, because that was the same language that was used at the U.S. Conference of Mayors by Secretary Buttigieg and others from U.S. DOT. Those areas of emphasis, starting with safety, and then thinking about equity, reconnecting communities, and I think there was one other factor as well. I wish I had my notes in front of me. As we go along here, I'll see if I can find them. Go ahead. I think we're on to Commissioner Look now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah,
I appreciate the study and I appreciate the information that was put forth here today. I just did a pretty basic search here under EPA.gov. And I think, you know, when we're talking about climate change, we're talking about greenhouse gas. If you look at the percentages there, transportation comes in at 29%. Okay, so the big bad wolf is actually 29% of what we're talking about here. And I think we need to keep that in mind. And I think additionally, what we need to keep in mind is the attractiveness of the Twin Cities area and the number of people that are moving in. And we know those numbers are increasing because it is attractive. And primarily what's attractive is jobs and the, you know, economic status of the area here. And if you have if you decide to do nothing, which is really deciding to do something, you're actually planning dysfunction at that point. You're planning for economic dysfunction and instability. If you're planning to have a 33% delay added to already congested roadway systems, you can expect your attractiveness to go down. You can expect people to look at you in terms of a Los Angeles or look at you in terms of a Atlanta. If anyone's ever driven any of those two locations, you know exactly what we're talking about. So, you know, when you hear that the VMTs are going to remain the same, that's good news. When you hear that the equity is going to, you know, is essentially going to be fair, that's good news. But again, it's not, if we solve all the climate change for vehicles, you're still only addressing 29%. So there's still 71% out there. Electricity is 25%, industry is 23%, agriculture is 10%, commercial 7%, residential 6%. So we really have to keep this in mind in terms of what we're doing. And I don't know that I need to remind anyone that the governor, not even 2 years ago, requested projects to identify kind of the justification of an increased gas tax. You know, particularly in Republican districts, but nevertheless, he asked for those projects so that they could come up with this large number of needs that are out there to try and justify passing gas tax. I think everyone will recall that. So there are a lot of needs out there, and there's a lot of lives that are being impacted by those roads that are there. You know, Highway 10 was one of them. Thankfully, we got dollars to fix those roads. But there's a lot of other Highway 10-like projects out there that do need increased capacity, do need to respond to the increased growth that's occurring in our communities. And the growth is good. So that's not something we should try and diminish and try and work against. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. On to Member Geisler and then Member Narayanan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to, you know, thank staff for whether or not we, you know, wholeheartedly agree with everything that's in here. There's a lot of good information in here. There's a lot of good longitudinal information here in the region, and having more information advises better decisions for us. So I do appreciate that of what's going on here. I also wanted to comment a little bit, you know, I mean, there are some tables in here that are already addressing of why they're choosing congestion, because the congestion measure is attached to things like safety, like business cost and freight to the economy, like environmental public health costs due to idling and burning of fuels and all that. So that while it is a singular metric, it is attached to some of those concepts that were brought up by other members. So, you know, it's a long, there's a lot of content in there, but I don't believe that staff chose congestion just because it's easy. It does attach to the concepts we've been discussing. But I do really want to highlight, I mean, I think the sensitivity study here around telecommuting is a key factor that I think we as a group here are not necessarily considering, that fiber is a transportation method. Because if you don't have to get on the road to do what you need to do, then potentially you are avoiding having the trip at all. And even if their numbers are off by 50% on their projections, it's still a significant impact to the region. And I don't think we can ignore that. We've seen Metro Transit talk about that of, you know, hey, do a car share, get on the bus, stay home one day. Businesses are not going to, you know, especially the commuting office worker, they're not going to be back to 5 days a week. Nobody is talking about that. It will be a reduced burden than what we had seen before. So that will change our demand aspects here. And I think, well, it's a little bit here, and I know staff is going to look into it more. I do think how telecommuting relates with transit, relates with freight movements across the industry or across the region are going to be key to us understanding how to make this region effective, not only for moving people around, but also goods and services. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Geisler. On to Member Narayana, and then Mayor Winchell, and then I think I got to think about who was next here. Member Hollinshead was after him, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you everybody who's spoken. I wanted to kind of give some, Mr. Chair, you'd mentioned that we'd sent a letter earlier. That's because my organization and and other major groups in the city have expressed concern around the assumptions in this report. Specifically, the biggest assumption being that all of these investments are actually going to reduce congestion and reduce delay. And we've seen over 40 or 50 years that is not necessarily true. And expanding highways over and over again, we've seen actually has either not reduced delay or made delay worse. And just to kind of give some numbers here, between 1993 and 2017, we added 30,000 or so new freeway lane miles of road in our 100 largest urbanized area. That includes the Twin Cities metro region. And that was an increase of 42% in lane miles. And then the rate of freeway expansion was much more than just the 32% growth in population. And in that time, delay has gone up by 144%. So our population went up by 32%, but delay has gone up by 144%, while we increased our lane miles by 42%. And so over and over and over, we're seeing that this is a failed strategy and one that has, just enormous financial costs. We constantly hear from MnDOT that we don't have enough money just to maintain the lane miles that we have. And Minnesota already has some of the highest per capita lane miles in the country. I think we are number 4 per capita in terms of how many miles of highway we have. And I really want to, go back to something Member Look said earlier. I really agree with you, Member Look, that we shouldn't be trying to stop growth. I think growth is great, and we should be having as much of that in our region and in our state as possible. But I don't think people are moving here because they want to live next to expanded freeways, breathe the noxious fumes from there, have their children be hit by cars. People are moving to cities because of, walkable neighborhoods, being able to see your neighbors, breathe clean air. And we are seeing, cities like Atlanta and LA that you mentioned, they have spent billions of dollars on highways, and they're still fighting congestion. And what we're seeing now is that multimodal investments, transit, biking, walking, and maintaining the roads that we have are the things that really work. And they come at a much lower cost as well. And so that's kind of the big reasons we raised our concerns with this report. And the reason that congestion doesn't go down is because when we expand highways, people drive more. People tend to use up that free space, and we end up with worse congestion often. After the roadway has been built, there's really no area in the United States that's been able to solve this. And so that's something I really want this group to kind of maybe think about, and happy to talk more about, the science behind this if needed. But I'll stop my comments there, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. On to Member Hollinshead. Mayor Winchell, I think, was next, and then Member Hollinshead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to comment about, we talk a lot about public transportation and things, but we have to look at our region more than just Minneapolis and St. Paul, because the outer rings don't have that ability to jump on a bus to do things. I mean, we've got a bus company that services our southwest our eastern Carver County, but they're in a continuous battle with Metro Transit about getting funding and doing some of the things that we talk about here. But overall, we have to look at our whole metro area and not just the downtown, because there are a lot of people we're going to open up an area that's going to create 400 to 600 jobs. Well, we have a bus service, but it stops and they can't get anywhere from there. So it's a different thing. You got to look at reverse commutes as well as commuting downtown. It's kind of the double-edged sword. I mean, and this report that they came out with, like they said, it's not an implementation. It's about having something. We've never had anything to go by other than saying, well, yeah, it costs us a lot of money. Now at least we have a number to say, this is what it's going to cost. So now we got to look at what is the next thing to do. But we always talk about that there's always public transportation available to us, but that's not the case. And then you look at the public transportation that's being brought out to our area that doesn't reach our county, but reaches the end of Hennepin County. Look at the delays that are happening and the cost. Ash, you talked about that it's so much money. How much money are we putting into this system now that's still another 5 to 6 years away? And when I was working in St. Louis Park, retired now 8 years from the fire department, we were already working on that construction. So, and I understand that we have to look at somehow to change how we drive, but at this point, we can't totally shut down the fact of that there are roads that need to be, the mobility piece of it. We still got to move around. And there's so many people now, the telecommute is great, but you know what that's doing? It's moving people out into the suburbs more because now they don't have to and they can be in a different environment. So there's all these comments, I can pick, and there's all kinds of pieces you can pick and pick out of it. I'm sure somebody will pick all kinds of things out of mine, but I'll quit there. But I think it's important to say that we have to look at this region, what we are. We're huge. We are a big region, and we can't look at just the core cities. We have to look outside of the core cities. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. And then Member Hollins had, and then I think Member Barber had her hand up at one point too.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to mention, to go back up to 30,000 feet, there's a couple things in our culture which prevent us from addressing the issues we're talking about right now. They really, and it's the premise on which our discussion is based, the premises on which our discussion is based. One of them is land use, and we really don't address land use here at the tab. We try and address it in individual cities. We try and address it through the Livable Communities grants of the Met Council. There are places that we try and address it, but in our culture generally, we do not disincentivize, in general, spreading out to the horizon. We feel that's a right of people. And if we're going to look at climate change logically and actually solve the problem, I think that's one of the elephants in the room. I think the other elephant in the room, and you can look at New York State, which passed a congestion fee enabling act for New York City. I think it was a couple of years ago now. They have been having trouble implementing that. And around the world, there are cities and metro areas that are looking at and implementing congestion fees. We simply refuse in our culture to do that kind of disincentive to driving and spreading out. So what is our congestion control measure? It's congestion itself. That's the only tool we have left. If you can't move on the highways, that might be an incentive to ride a bus or ride a train. That's the only tool we have to disincentivize driving and to incentivize transit riding. So, I've listened to these discussions for 25 years now, and we keep avoiding those two elephants in the room. And until we do things that are found to work in the rest of the world, like in Stockholm and London and Singapore, and until we try doing some of those things, we're just going to go round and round and round in circles on this. And this study and this report, I agree with Member Narayanan and Blackwell from Move Minnesota. I think that trying to relieve congestion all the time in terms of faster motor vehicle use is a fool's errand. You can't do it. You can spend your life trying to do it, but you can't do it eventually. So I just wanted to put those 2 cents in. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Member Hollinshead. Before I go back to Member Barber, who's had a chance to speak a couple of times, I want to go to Member Jepson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you everyone for your comments. I really respect all of your opinions on this, but I want to point out Mayor Winchettle's comments, and thank you for voicing the suburb situations that we're dealing with, because all things being equal, yes, these would be great, removing congestion, solving those problems, not needing to add lanes to highways. But you know what happens when highways are congested? They go into the cities. And we, as a city of Blaine, are having massive congestion problems on Central Avenue Trunk Highway 65. And it wouldn't help if we added lanes to that highway, because the congestion would still be there, because it's a main north-south connector to greater Minnesota. But you know what does help is quality of the roads. And with higher quality roads and movement of transit along that road, we are introducing bike ped. We are making it safe, because out in the suburbs, walking and biking is not a way to get from point A to B. The purpose is for recreation, because you can't get from point A to point B in the suburbs walking or riding a bike, nor can you have the opportunity of transit. Like Amity mentioned in the chat, yes, public transit should be made available to all of us, but it's not, because it's not a priority, and it really hasn't ever been. And so yes, if you're comparing apples to apples and all things being equal, all of these initiatives would be great. But for us in the outer ring, it's not a reality that we can focus on. So thank you, Mayor Winchettle, for your comments on, yes, let's not just look at Minneapolis and Ramsey and Hennepin and Ramsey counties. Let's look at this outer ring and what are the priorities and the reality that we are living in right now, and how we can be benefited too for our residents. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member Jepson. I'll go back now to Member Barber, and I think we'll wrap up. We got a couple more items to cover that won't take much time, but I think I'd like to get them in if we can. So it's been a fabulous conversation here. Member Barber?
Well, I will be quick, and I will echo those comments that I think when we're looking at everything, we need to look at it from the perspective of the entire region, because we have urban, we have emerging suburban, we have suburban, we have rural. We serve a variety of communities, and we need to look at the needs in the different areas. You know, just looking at some of the statistics that Ash had put out of the number of highway miles in the state of Minnesota, in the 7-county metro, we have 12%. If we do the metro district, which includes Chisago County, it's 13.9% of the state total of trunk highways. And in that region, it serves 56% of the state's population on 4% of the state land. So we have to look at it from the regional perspective and make sure that we understand, as being the economic engine of the state that we are, that we need to make sure that we're making the best opportunities that serve all of our communities. I don't think that just adding highways and lanes is always the best option. Even if you look at our priorities, it starts, Steve had gone through these, it starts with travel demand management, then traffic management technologies, then spot mobility, then easy pass lanes. And then the final one is adding strategic capacity enhancements. And I think that as a tab, as a group, we have done that. We have been doing that throughout. That's why we've added things like added funding for ABRT lines, or adding the spot mobility program into the regional solicitation. We have prioritized that way. This just gives us a tool to help look at things when the solution is something where there is a capacity or mobility need that could be addressed with some sort of enhancement. It gives us a way to at least prioritize how that funding should be spent and where those projects make the most sense. So again, I just want to thank Steve and Paul for your work, and thank you for all of you for the great discussion today. I think all of these kinds of conversations, along with this information that we got presented today, really do help inform our work, especially as we move towards the next cycle for the transportation policy plan.
All right, thank you, Member Barber. So we've got this work that's been done. You've got some next steps. Paul, Steve, the conversation today may have led you to some other ideas about what we need to be assessing, but I think everybody has a common goal here with thinking about the benefit of being a region where people want to live in the North Country, where we've got 800,000 more people projected to be here by 2050. To the question that I think everybody has raised in different ways is, what's the best strategy to reduce congestion with that expected increase in population and dealing with what we have now. As Ash says, no one's discovered the secret sauce yet. Maybe this is our chance. You know, if we get enough data to work with, enough different elements that we can study here, maybe this tab can help come up with a solution and come up with an approach that really helps reduce congestion and develops a great strategy around it that also has a climate aspect and an equity aspect to it. So thanks for that great conversation today, everybody. Really wonderful food for thought. And then let's go quickly to Quarters of Commerce. Pat Wiedemann, I think Patrick is with us.
Yes, he is.
All right, I like that positive attitude.
Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patrick Wiedemann. I'm the Director of Capital Planning and Programming for MnDOT. And most of my duties are related to STIP, but I do have one little area that I oversee as the administrator of the Quarters of Commerce program in the state. So I'm going to, I'm hoping somebody's calling up my presentation. I think it'll be easier if we run it that way. Yes, somebody from Met Council.
Greg will be pulling it up here, yeah.
Yep. And for the sake of time, Mr. Chair, I am going to blow through about 2/3 of this with not much discussion. That's background, and I'm going to let you all read it at your leisure and respectful for your time, and get right to what MnDOT is proposing. What the gist of this is the Quarters of Commerce program has been in existence since 2013, and over the years, it's had some various legislative changes that have gone to it, and the department would like to make some changes. So, if you go to the next slide, the program started in 2013 with $300 million. That was the first time it was put in place. The next two slides you can skip over. These are just some history of where the program has come. In 2021, though, the legislature did give us $200 million worth of bonds. And the requirement by the legislature is that by August 1st of this year, 2022, we begin the solicitation process again. And so the delay was intentional by the legislature to allow time for MnDOT and the legislature to try and address some perceived low points or weaknesses within the program. And so that's kind of why we are making a proposal that we are. Go ahead and to the next slide. And you can skip the next slide as well. Those are Quarter of Commerce eligibility requirements. For those of you who are interested, I'd encourage you to go back and take a look at those. Next slide. And the next slide. So there are two fundamental issues that we found. Yep. The first one is projects needing to be evaluated. When we did the 2017 funding, there were 173 individual projects we received. That's a lot, folks. 173 projects that MnDOT had to fully scope and score and get cost estimates for. That was a lot of work on a lot of people's part. And so coming out of that, we wanted to make changes so that the process was more streamlined. Next. Next again. The other issue that we discovered in the 2017 was an issue of regional balance. Next. Now, some of you probably have looked at the statute, and this is all it says: regional balance throughout the state. That's all the law says. That's it. Next. Now, in 2017, MnDOT proceeded under the direction of our commissioner at that time, your commissioner, Mr. Zelli, that we would take the approach that 50% of the funding would go to the metro district, the 8 counties within our metro district, and 50% would go to the districts outside of that area. That was the definition that we used to try and achieve regional balance, and that was kind of tailoring to what MnDOT for a while had been doing, a 50-50 balance. Next. Now, these are the 4 projects that came out of the 2017, okay? So the first 2 are real easy. They're right in the heart of the metro area, 494 and 494-35. The next 2, the the 169 Elk River and I-94 are adjacent to the metro area. And when you put all 4 of these on a map, guess what? They're within 50 linear miles of downtown Minneapolis. And shortly after we announced the 2017 projects, MnDOT was heavily criticized that we only focused on metro area projects. Next. The fact is, however, those 2 projects in Greater Minnesota are in fact in our District 3. They are in our District 3 in Brainerd St. Cloud office. And so we followed our statement that we would do a 50-50 split that way, but it was pretty clear from the pushback we got that people's interpretation of regional balance were far different. Next slide. Next. So I'm going to walk through the proposed changes that we are making to the legislature this year. The first one is the local stakeholder screening process, and this involves you folks directly. Next. We are proposing to make a change to include a new step in the project evaluation process for Corridors of Commerce that we're calling the local stakeholder screening process. After we close the project recommendations, which any member of the public, business, or corridor coalition could submit an idea, we will divide those projects up according to their area transportation partnerships. Now, in the metro area, you probably don't hear the term area transportation partnership very much, but you are in one. It's the 7 counties of Met Council tab plus Chisago County. Okay, next. So in Greater Minnesota, for the Greater Minnesota ATPs, we're going to have each of the ATPs review all of the project recommendations that are within their area and recommend up to 3 of that whole set to proceed to scoring. Okay, and then the rest of the projects we're going to drop. We're not going to do any development on them. We're not going to go any further. We're going to just strictly work on the ones that they recommend. Okay, next. And what I thought I'd do, Chair, by the way, is I'm going to run through this whole presentation and come back for questions. I hope that's
Sure,
okay.
Mr. Weideman, that's fine. That's good. That's a good way to do it.
Okay. Now, in the metro area, because it's a little bit different, for the 7 counties underneath the Metropolitan Council area, TAB will review all the projects that are recommended for consideration, and then you will select up to 10 to recommend to the council, and the council will recommend those 10 be advanced to the scoring and selection phase. How that gets done at this point, we are leaving up to the TAB and to the council. That'll be same with the ATPs. We're not saying you have to do it this way or that way. It's whichever 10 you want to advance. Now it's important. The metro area is advancing 10, and the ATPs are only advancing 3, and I'll explain that difference here in a moment. But the big thing is after that, those 10 are recommended, the other projects will be dropped for further consideration. Okay, and that's in, again, the 7 counties in Met Council area. Next. Now, that still leaves Chisago County. So the Chicago County Board is going to be allowed to recommend up to 1 project using their own criteria, and that will join the up to 10 from the Met Council to make 11 projects that will compete for the metro portion of the Corridors of Commerce funding. Okay, next. When you're all said and done, that means that a maximum of 32 projects would need to be fully developed and scored by MnDOT. You consider that against the 173 we had to do last time, and you can quickly see the difference in effort. Again, the Greater Minnesota projects would compete against themselves, and the Metro projects would compete against themselves. Okay, next. Our second proposed change, definition of regional balance. Next. We are that same regional balance that we used in 2017. We want that in law, and that's only to clarify for the legislators, because we got hammered on it so bad. We just simply wanted to clarify it so there's no confusion at all. And this is exactly the same definition we used in 2017. Next. Finally, we are proposing a small projects category. Now, this doesn't directly affect the metro area. Next. In Greater Minnesota, we're going to carve out their projects into 2 categories, large and small. Small projects would be $10 million or less, and large projects would be greater than $10 million. And what we are proposing is that 25% of the greater Minnesota portion of COC funds go to small projects. And this is an attempt by the department to try and address the criticism that all the projects were grouped so tightly around the metro area to try and get a few more dots out in greater and more rural areas of the state. Okay. And that's kind of a quick rundown through the program. The slides have a little bit more detail, but I am here to answer some of your questions. So I will open it up, Mr. Chair.
Good, thank you. Yeah, thanks for pulling that down, Greg. Questions for Mr. Weideman? Mayor Winchell?
Well, I'm just curious, you know, we can barely get through one of our meetings now, and now we're gonna go through what you were talking about, taking these projects, and we're gonna vet them all out, and you even talked about pricing them out. How is the tab gonna have a chance to do all of this and make those recommendations? It just seems like you're passing your work problem to ours.
So, Mr. Chair and Mayor, what we're trying to do is limit the total number of projects. Now, that is a concern. So, well, so how does TAB work through and what criterion? We are going to provide a fair amount of time for the development of that if these proposals are approved by the legislature. The goal is to give you plenty of flexibility. Whether you want to use that the projects need to be in some kind of planning process, that we're going to kind of leave up to the tab. You do not have to do the development of the projects. You're just going to actually get the raw recommendations that we receive, and from that, trim that down to 10. MnDOT will still do all the project development and scoring and everything on the projects that are recommended to proceed for the scoring phase. That we will still do.
To Mayor Winchell's point, thanks for the confidence, I guess.
Yeah, it seems odd. Isn't there a way that these projects are generally coming through the counties? Isn't there a screening process through the county? I mean, counties are actively working on them as well. I don't know this.
Well, the counties don't have the same kind of structure that we have at the tab, which includes the counties and the cities. So,
no,
but your point is well made, I think. I'm going to jump on the Commissioner to look and then Commissioner Ulrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so being on tab now for quite a few years, I was actively involved in the corridors of commerce concept from the standpoint that we were working, as I mentioned earlier, on Highway 10. Highway 10 was not on the STIP, and we needed a vehicle through which funding could come that wasn't already scheduled through MnDOT. I worked very closely with Frank Hornstein, Scott Dibble on trying to get this corridors of commerce project underway, and thankfully they were able to do that. The first one that went through pretty well, but then the second one that came through, it was Representative Abigail Whalen who put criteria then into law that certain projects that met criteria would be, could receive funding. And of course, a lot of that criteria was written around very similar problems that we're having on Highway 10. I think that was done intentionally. She represented the Highway 10 area. It was then MnDOT that was required to do the scoring on that, on the criteria. And I think Highway 10 scored 16th on the list. Okay, so criteria is written around 10 and it scored 16th on the list. And naturally, we were very displeased with that. And I think there was a lot of, complaining maybe associated with that. And then it was at that point that McBride was involved, and I had a conversation with McBride and said, yeah, but you guys did you weighted the scoring. So it wasn't just the criteria, it was how you scored that criteria and the weighting of that that criteria and scoring that got it to where it was at. So, and I also recall, MnDOT at that point was not necessarily very happy because they were kind of more of took a position of, why don't you give us some money and we'll decide to simplify matters. I remember TAB was not very happy, Mr. Chair, and I think this was before your chairmanship, that we were somewhat bypassed in this process. But, I think one of the major problems that came out of the last quarters of commerce was just about any proposal was allowed, including what I'll refer to as napkin sketch drawings. In other words, there was a little design and basically no community support, but someone thought, hey, we need a new interchange, here, and so let's just submit this. And it was at that point that just, hundreds and hundreds of projects came in, or whatever the amount was. It seemed like there was a lot at the time. So my question, I guess, is with this new proposal then, and knowing that Representative Whalen was successful in passing their criteria into law, are you proposing a change to law? Is that what's being proposed at this point?
Mr. Chair, yes, Commissioner Locke, that is exactly what we are proposing is actual physical changes to the legislative language. We are working with the legislator to introduce it as agency bill changes. And again, it has to be that way without any actual physical changes. As you noted, the requirement that everything we get has to be scored and scored only to the criterion, and we can't use any screening vessel to do that, is all in statute. And that's why we had to do that 173 last time. And I got to tell you, that about broke a lot of our districts, including the Metro folks. That was an immense amount of effort. And again, there were only 4 projects that received funding when we were done.
Commissioner Ulrich.
Patrick, I just want to give you and the tab the heads up that Scott County is going to oppose this in the legislature. We're going to oppose Commissioner Commerce projects, quarters of commerce projects being vetted by the tab. We believe it should stay with MnDOT. If you want to do all the other areas with the ATPs, that would certainly be fine, but we believe the Metro should be vetted by the Metro District of MnDOT. And somebody might say, well, why would you have that feeling? Why would you have that opinion? The debate that we just had in the last half hour is exactly the reason we think MnDOT should vet the quarters of commerce project.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Mayor, I think you forgot to pull your hand down. Mayor Winchell.
I did.
Yep. All right. Well, Mr. Weideman, thanks for the courage to come over here today.
That's fine. I appreciate the opportunity. Again, MnDOT is very open to anything that the legislature wants to work. I think you hear very clearly. Our proposals here are basically along 2 lines. One, to reduce the kind of all of the burdensome work we had to do beforehand. And the second one was just to respond to the fact that the rural areas of the state did not feel that they had competed well. And so that's the 2 focuses of our area.
Yeah, hold on a moment, Mr. Weideman. I forgot to call in Commissioner Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quick, I'll get the exact number wrong, but weren't there like 30 some projects in the Metro that scored higher than those 2 projects in District 3?
I do believe that's about right when you put them all in a singular list. If you scored them accordingly, yes, that would have been probably how they came out.
Right. So I mean, this does nothing to address the vast unbalance of money versus need across the entire state.
Yeah, this is, again, MnDOT is approaching this as we have to administer this program. And I think it was said earlier, if you ask MnDOT, we still believe that funding, should be operated through our regular programming channels. But the legislature believes this program to be very successful. I think it has had some clearly identified successes. And all we are proposing to do is to make it easier for us as an agency to administer. That's all these changes are designed to do.
Well, I've been saying this for decades, but the lack of proportionality in funding to need across the state is problematic. And this is a program that exacerbates that. I mean, it's just so out of whack of need versus how the money flows. And we have roads in greater Minnesota that are 4-lane divided with all the of things that come with it that have less traffic on it than city streets in Lakeville. And it's just so wrong in use of resources, in my opinion.
Commissioner, don't even think about going back to the legislature. We like you right here with us. All right. So
Well, where I live now, there's an incumbent. I have open House districts to the east of me and open Senate district to the west of me, but I'm staying put.
good. The only comment I would have is that the scoring, I mean, I think for most people, the scoring that you've used on the corridors of commerce, as I recall, has been somewhat confidential. And so for us to devise a scoring system at the tab that's not consistent with what you're doing at MnDOT, I think would be, assuming Scott County isn't successful in defeating this legislation, we better be working together if we end up with this responsibility.
Mr. Chair, I assure you that if the legislature proceeds forward, we will be working hand in hand to get this accomplished.
All right. All right. Well, thank you for being here today. We appreciate you giving us this update on the corridors of commerce, which I think, as you point out, has had some nice success. All right, we got one other thing. We got Molly McCartney with us today as well from MnDOT. I think we can get this in quickly. Tell me if I'm wrong, otherwise we'll have to think about holding it over. I hate to have her wait again. I think she's waited one meeting already. So, Ms. McCartney, go ahead. Let's just try to get it done.
Yeah, Chair Hovland, it's my birthday gift to you today is that I'm going to do this in a couple minutes, okay?
All right, very good.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and members of TAB. So this is an information item that MnDOT Metro District's bringing to you. My name is Molly McCartney. I am the director of our capital improvement program at Metro. This is to update you on the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act funds coming directly to MnDOT in the district. This is different than the conversation and decisions you had about funds coming to the region from the CARISA Act. This is one of the COVID packages passed in December 2020. So the districts were given some direction from our central office and leadership on how to spend funding coming towards the district.
Did you want anything on the screen, Ms. McCartney?
Oh, yeah. You know, I'm sorry. Yes. Maybe Elaine can help you with this. There is a link in the agenda to a 2-page memo, and that's all I really have prepared.
Okay. All right. I've got the memo up on my computer here.
Okay.
So go ahead.
I apologize for that. I could probably also do that. Let's see. Okay. Too many platforms. Okay, so this is the memo that I pulled up. Metro District is getting about $17 million of the CARISA funds to spend. This is federal funds, needs to be spent by end of federal fiscal year. So that's September 30th, 2024. Metro is anticipating to spend this increased target on a couple of projects. One is going to be the Interstate 494 Minnesota River Bridge crossing, just west of the airport. We have a large bridge project with a letting in next fiscal year to rehab the main bridges. Then 5 adjacent bridges, doing some trail work on the Minnesota River Trail, as well as some drainage work. And we do have additional needs for that and would like to, we'll allocate that funding to that project through the next tip update. Another sub allocation within this is about $3.5 million that the district would like to spend capital investments on underserved communities, focusing on projects with multimodal needs, including accessible pedestrian infrastructure. And we looked at projects within this time period, again, needing to spend it by the end of 24. Well, that had a geographic characteristics of a high number of car-free households, high reliance on walking, biking, and transit. And we have a project in 2024 on Highway 5 and US 61, otherwise known as East 7th Street and Arcade, on the east side of St. Paul. That does have a gap on it. This project, MnDOT recently received a federal RAISE grant which is the Rebuilding America's Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity. But again, we do have we will have a gap. There's significant right-of-way on this project. There's over 100 parcels that need some sort of temporary or permanent easement, and a number of areaways, which are a very interesting challenge for any project with that underground access to buildings from the right-of-way. So those are the two projects we'll be programming this round of the TIP and STIP. And this is purely informational. There's some other funding coming out of that, out of CRISA, that will be spent in the district, but is being directed centrally. And so there's funding going towards the Highway 10 project up in Anoka. The Gateway project, $15 million. The commissioner also directed another $16 million to the 494 Corridors of Commerce project. There's a statewide bridge preservation program run by our central office, bridge office, that will spend money on, again, the Minnesota River Bridge, and then some other workforce development and some innovative contracting work that will likely get spent in Metro, but other districts as well. And so it's information item. You'll be able to make decisions as we look at the TIP again later on this summer when it comes through for public review. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. McCartney. That was, yeah, great to get that update and hear how you're going to use some of those federal funds. Anybody have any questions for Ms. McCartney? Look at that great group hanging in there with us until 3 o'clock. Thank you so much for hanging around that extra half hour and getting all this good work done. Really, it's the tab gets more and more interesting month to month with all of the good work we're doing and getting recognized for it, apparently, at least by MnDOT, and deciding that we are another source of assistance for the region. We'll see where that goes. So I don't have anything else, folks. Does anyone have anything for the good of the order? Any tab members want to raise an issue? I see a hand pop up. Mr. Coughlin, Member Coughlin.
Thank you very much, Bob Coughlin, Savage. I just wanted tab members to know of two pieces of legislation that have been introduced into the House of Representatives concerning transportation. One of them is House File number 2874. See if I can actually share this. And this House File 2874 is the repeal of the Dan Patch gag order. And so we here in Savage think that this has been a very important transit line that has been not talked about for way too long. And so currently the Dan Patch commuter line moratorium is asked to be repealed. That is House File 2874. And also in close proximity to that is House File 2873, which even if the Dan Patch gag order is not lifted, it is a rail transitway feasibility study, specifically looking at the transit line from St. Louis Park down to Savage, also known as the Dan Patch rail line. But here it would be able to submit for a study on that rail line, even if the gag order is not repealed. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Member Coughlin, a quick question for you. I had someone in Edina ask me the other day, what was the date that original gag order was put in place? I thought it was between 2000 and 2010 sometime, but do you know that date?
Yes, it was done in 2002. The specific date in 2002 is not known. The original law was Law 2002, Chapter 393, Section 85.
All right.
So
Thanks for that level of detail. And I'll pass that year along to the person that asked me. Anything else from any tab members? Anything else?
Mr.
Other
Chair?
business we want to cover? Yes.
I just have to speak that Dakota County opposes that. And I would urge anybody that is interested in that to go walk the rail line in Lakeville. I don't think you environmentally and safety wise could ever put a train on that track ever again, given how it goes through backwaters of Lake Marion, et cetera. So
we're only
There's good
talking,
reasons for that.
we're only talking from Savage to Minneapolis.
Yeah, and then you're
With
good,
our
but
downtown planning, we have to be able to talk about things.
Yeah, I
right. Well,
thought
then
that.
I don't think there'd be opposition to the second bill, but just the repeal. And the repeal only prohibited the state from spending money. Locals can still study it.
That's true, but MnDOT and the Met Council can't talk about it. That's the part.
There's reasons.
Okay, all right. Well, maybe there'll be some amendments along the way that'll make it clear that, or clearer that we're talking about Savage of St. Louis Park. Anyway. To go through Edina, we'll call it the Green Hornet Line. You okay with that?
We are.
All right, okay.
That's fine.
South by Southwest was another name I've heard trotted out.
Right.
Anyway, thanks, folks. Anything else for the group? It was a terrific meeting today. Thanks, everybody, for your input. You know, a lot of good thinkers in this group. Really appreciate it. And see you in March. Bye, everybody.